Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. It is so good to see you again. For those of you who are new here, welcome. I'm so glad you've joined us here today, especially for this conversation. It's going to be all about sex. So welcome. I know a lot of you have been asking about this topic. I get this all the time inside my private community, the attachment circle with group coaching in there. Every other day is Adam. How does this group feel about sex? How does that group feel about sex? What does sex mean to my avoidant partner? I just got done recording a great video that'll be on the channel very soon about bonding with your avoidant partner during sex and how to actually activate the oxytocin bonding that they might have been missing for their whole life. Today, I wanted to bring on an expert in attachment, a fellow attachment practitioner. This is Bev Mitelman. She runs Securely Loved, a section of the internet that is devoted to helping you build secure love in your relationships and in yourself. Bev, welcome to the channel. Say hi to everybody and tell us a little bit about you.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. I'm so happy to be talking with you and your audience. I think very similar to your story of origin, I too came across attachment styles years ago when I was on my own personal journey of healing. I know you've shared with your audience that at one point in your life, you were on the anxious side and you needed for your own healing to move towards secure attachment. And I have a very similar story. I was on the fearful avoidance side, leaning quite avoidant actually, and I chose to do the work to move towards secure. And it was so impactful for me that I decided this is where I need to be spending my time. So yeah, I love your channel. I love what you're putting out into the world, and I'm honored to have this conversation with you.
Well, we're very glad to have you here, and especially to my disorganized crew out in the audience, guys.
Not
Welcome.
alone.
And look, we've got somebody right here to represent you, although she's done her work and she's phenomenal now. Drop down if you have any questions about disorganized style in the comments. We are going to make sure that you get represented in the conversation here today. I know that so often you get swept aside because that blend is it's less common. It's less common, but it is no less important. So stick around. We're going to make sure you get the adequate screen time that you deserve. But drop comments below for us. Bev, let's talk a little bit about here. I sent over before we did this, I said, hey, I'd love to have you come on and talk about secure attachment because everybody needs to know what is secure attachment. It's one of the biggest questions I get. What does it even look like? I've never
Mhm.
seen it. It's like imagining a giraffe if you've never seen a giraffe. Well, it's kind of like a horse, except it's also like a leopard, except, maybe more like a Loch Ness monster. But I don't know. It's like you try to describe it that way and they have no idea. So secure attachment is the same way. And I love that you came back and said, Adam, what if we talk about this fun topic? What if we talk about, and you go ahead, tell them what we're going to talk about here today.
We're going to talk about sex and what it means to the different attachment styles. And, what we know about attachment style is that it has such a big impact on, of course, our emotional patterns, our thinking, and on our behavior. And sex is just a part of that. It's a natural extension. And so we do see some significant differences, and they're super interesting. So I thought, you know what? Let's do this topic instead.
I saw a reel that you put out recently talking about how the attachment styles are not purely gendered the way that we often understand. And I know that there is, yes, an edge. More women tend to be anxious, more men do
Mhm.
tend to be avoidant, and as you said, self-reporting into those categories. But the cross is just as common. My mentor, Dr. Robert Glover, he wrote the book literally on anxious men. No more Mr. Nice Guy. I grew up anxiously attached. There's plenty of
Mhm.
avoidant women out in the audience right now, ladies. Welcome. We are going to make sure we talk about you here today. And a lot of men out in the audience are anxious men with avoidant women as
Yes.
well. So there's a big cross section. Let's make sure we hit them all here today. Um, what what does sex mean, do you think, for let's start off with the dismissive avoidant types. Let's start off with the avoidant types. On this channel, I'm revamping attachment theory, you probably know, and I'm spreading avoidance into two different categories. One is ethical avoidant, where they are highly moral, no manipulative behaviors. Yes, they have a very hard time collaborating with other people, but they are brutally honest, almost to a fault, and that's what usually gets them in trouble. And then sliding down that spectrum, they accrue more and more manipulative tendencies, usually on a negative view on other people, as they got more and more hurt in childhood, more manipulative avoidant off over here. So we're speaking here to the ethical avoidant here today, what would be classically known maybe as dismissive avoidant. What does sex mean to them, Beth?
So it can mean a lot of things. In fact, I've prepared a number of points that I wanted to speak to you about the differences between the avoidant and the anxious in terms of how they view sex. But I wonder before we dive into that, maybe we talk about what sex means for the secure person. Maybe we start the conversation there. So this is sort of like our baseline.
That's a great place to build the contrast. This
Mhm.
is what it means to have secure sex, and then we can spread out from there so that people can see that
Yeah.
dichotomy. Love it. Go ahead. Let's do it.
So, what we know about secure people is that they have a very healthy sense of themselves and a trust with others. They typically are fluid with their communication. They're pretty good with boundaries. So they tend to do well in long-term relationships. So that, of course, flows over into sex. They tend to have an ease with sex and intimacy. They welcome it. They're communicative. They tend to have a strong preference to have sex within a long-term commitment. So people who are generally secure are not the folks going, yeah, let's have a one night stand.
Right.
That's generally not where they're falling.
Right. Yeah, that is much more of an insecure phenomenon for a variety of reasons. I will
Yeah.
say the number one thing when people say, "Oh, what's the difference with sex when you're secure?" There's a lot more laughter, I think, is probably the most
Yes.
surprising thing. Laughter and play and
Yes.
smiling. It's a more joyful and non-performative experience. And
Yes.
you're actually interacting together, eye contact, games, fun. It's a fun and what we call unitive experience. I don't get to use that word very often.
Yeah.
And actually, my team says, Adam, no one knows what unitive. Don't say unitive anymore. No
I
one knows that.
know.
It's it's a unitive experience, meaning it unites you, it bonds you, it fulfills you. That's what sex is to a secure person or secure couple. It's an engagement in the intimacy you already have. It's an expression of the love and bonding between you, and it just enhances it. Is that a fair way to say it?
I couldn't have said it any better. It's absolutely an expression of love. It's a way to deepen the emotional bond. And it's absolutely, when done right, a form of play.
Yes. And it's not that it goes on for 3 hours each time. A secure couple
No.
can still knock one out on a Saturday morning. But you have a good time. You talk about it. You share experiences. If you didn't like something, you can talk about it. Say, yeah, that wasn't really for me. Let's not really
Right.
give that a shot again. But you can also open up and explore. You can do all kinds of fun stuff. What's
Yes.
funny is we have this whole misconception that married people have no sex. You get married and the sex stops. And instead, what we actually find is the research is clear on this. Married people are far more likely to have sex than any other demographic. It's because
Mhm.
you're in close connection with each other all the time. You're always there. You always have a partner. It
Yep.
doesn't mean it's always great or that you're a securely married couple, but you are more
Right.
likely to have that bond in that closely bonded, cohabitating union with one committed partner. You are far more likely, no matter what the memes might say.
Yeah, and there's a level of intimacy there too, right? So it's like, you wake up in the morning and like you said, you have a quickie. That's not, you don't do that with everyone. That's when you're in a
Yep.
long-term committed relationship. So yeah, it's a beautiful thing, actually, an expression of love, emotional bonding. I think you said it perfectly. Yeah.
100%. I love it. All right, everybody out there, I hope that was clear on what's different for secure people. You can, ladies out there in particular, you can ask for what you need. You can share
Hmm.
feedback. It's welcomed. You don't walk away feeling like the job was half done. The job is like triple done, right? And you actually get the care and nurturing that you need before, during, and after. A lot of secure
Yeah.
couples have that aftercare experience as well because they're both actually relaxing. They're bonded and they're connected. That's Bev, on this channel. There was a big shock about a year ago when I released a couple of videos talking about aftercare and what it is. And so many women in the channel came out and said, "That's a thing. I can ask for that." Like, wait, that's normal? I thought I was weird that I wanted that. Yeah, yeah,
Not
right.
weird at
It
all.
was so. I was reading the comments, like tears are streaming down my cheeks. Like these poor women, like they're not getting any of this bonding. All that oxytocin flow afterward is just being dropped off a cliff, and the heartbreak. So a securely attached relationship is before, during, and after. Remember that foreplay starts the moment that the game stops. right? That's where foreplay starts the next
Yeah.
morning. So
Like,
it's
it
always
starts
on.
like first thing in the morning, just your interactions with each other, that playfulness. So, and the other beautiful thing is that you mentioned this, you can explore together without fear of rejection or feeling shame or, hey babe, why don't we try that thing tonight? Right. And if they're in, great, but they're not going to turn around and go, what's wrong with you? There's a security, there's a safety there where you can explore and enjoy and go outside of your regular bounds, right? So that's what secure love is.
Yes, it's not. You have the first date, you do wild, crazy stuff to bond, and then you can't make eye contact ever again. It's that's not the experience inside a committed relationship. It is it is full eye contact during and after. But then you have that conversation after. How was that for you? Well, you know, I don't know. That wasn't super for me. If you enjoyed it, we can do it on anniversaries, but it wasn't super for me. Well, why don't we try this next thing? Try the next thing. Get the power sander out, right? Like whatever comes next, you can
you
have
know,
that experience.
my ex-boyfriend and I, we used to do this funny thing after sex. We'd be like, so how is that for you? And he'd be like, that was an 8. And I'm like, okay, because that was like a 6.5 for me. So, but it was a funny moment because we were like, we would try new things and go, that didn't quite work. But that didn't tear us apart. We just said, well, we'll just try something else next time.
Yeah,
Right.
a 6.5 from you, an 8 from him, and a 3 from the German judge. It was the dismount that really got you. That's what it was. No, but it is. You can have that you have that conversation. And that's how a couple is supposed to be right there. And that's secure attachment, you guys.
Yeah.
The reason Bev and I teach secure attachment, both of us, the reason we're on the internet is not so that you can get secure attachment and then wrap yourself in a shawl and sit there in a chair dramatically by the window and say, I'm securely attached, and then just be alone for the rest of your life. It's the joy that comes into your life and the fulfillment every moment in your relationships and being able to have those conversations and the low stress that then leads to the decrease in your sympathetic nervous system and then the flood into your parasympathetic nervous system. And that's what I think most people miss is they can understand and they can comprehend that secure attachment brings their sympathetic nervous system down. They can
Mm-hmm.
imagine the absence of pain and stress, but imagining the depth of fulfillment and contentment in the parasympathetic nervous system that so few of them have ever touched, that's what so many people are really missing. When they try to imagine a giraffe, that's what they miss. And that's what I
Yeah.
want them to take from this.
It's almost hard to put it into words because you have to experience it, right? So if your baseline is like you're highly anxious, you wake up in the morning and you're like 8 out of 10, you've got so little in terms of emotional bandwidth, you have no room for creativity, for joy, for laughter, for moments of silliness. You're just surviving, right? But when you move out of that survival, all of a sudden you can indulge in pleasures and joys and like creative things, and not just sex, so many things, but sex also becomes, that creative joy that we're talking about. So it makes a huge difference. Yeah.
It really does. So many guys complain about their wife has no desire. After the first year or after having kids, it just dies. I've got 5 kids. I've been married for 16 years, and I put on this suit and I had to chase my wife out of my filming studio here just to get this filmed because she was trying to pinch my butt because she liked the suit. Like, lady, leave me alone. Come on, give me a day off, kind of thing.
I love
That
that.
is that's a securely attached relationship. It's why we have 5 kids. That is the joy of a fulfilling, secure relationship. So guys
Yeah,
out there, secure attachment. But to get secure attachment and to get that experience, you also have to give her love and fulfillment on her side so that she can feel safe enough to enter that mode with you and be bonded to
for
you. So,
sure.
Bev, with that in mind, I'd love to head into what does sex mean and what's the experience of the different attachment styles? Give me your perspective, please.
So before we jump in, I have a couple of disclaimers I want to put out because we're going to talk about some trends in terms of how people see things, perspectives, trends in behavior. And it's always difficult when we're talking about trends because we're talking in generalities. And there's always going to be people who go, well, I'm not like that, or that doesn't apply to me. And so, I ask people, please keep an open mind and definitely let us know, does this apply to you? Does it not apply to you? But we know there are always outliers, right? When we talk about trends within a particular group. Now, the other thing also is we know that attachment runs along a continuum. So the closer you are to that actual avoidant or anxious, the more pronounced some of these traits and behaviors will be. So someone, for example, might be secure leaning avoidant and not, relate to anything that we're talking about here. So we're talking a little bit in the extremes here to make a point. But I want people to keep that in mind also, right? Because it's a continuum. There's very few people who fall smack in one category, right? Do you agree, Adam?
I will say that every human being has their own experience, and it's all going to be a little bit different. Take the
Yeah.
pieces that match what you're experiencing. If it's a slightly different, take the lessons for what they are. But number one, what you need to do before anything else is apply that information into your life and trial and error it yourself.
Yeah.
Whatever Bev and I are telling you in here, great. This is information, fantastic. You've probably spent the last 20 years reading books, listening to podcasts, and studying intellectually anyway. The next step really is action and testing and communicating with human beings. So
Mm-hmm.
whatever we tell you here today, go give it a shot yourself and then season and salt it to your own taste.
I love that. All right. So we're going to be talking specifically for the next little bit about those who are anxious and those who are avoidant and the differences there. So the first point I wanted to bring up is generally when we're talking about folks who are anxious, they do see sex as, or they put an emphasis on the emotion. It's emotional bonding for them, right? So we know that this cohort of folks, approval is very important, reassurance is very important, emotional closeness is very important. So for them, sex is a way to get that. Okay? No surprise there?
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
None.
I mean, most things are a way for them to get approval and to get that connection. Most things in their world are. That's,
Yeah.
that's all they are. That's mostly what they understand. So, sex is not much different. It's trying to feel good a bit, but what I have seen largely with women and with men who are anxiously attached is it's performative and service based to the other person. It's a
Oh, we're
service
getting
you
there.
perform for the other person. Oh yeah, that's what I figured. Okay, take it away.
Performative
Go ahead.
is such a good word. Yeah, it is. Right. So if we look at the same theme here for the avoidant, generally the avoidant, when it comes to sex, the emphasis for them is on the physical, right? It's not on the emotional. And so when we look at what does sex mean for people, sex will mean an opportunity to emotionally bond or get closer to someone for an avoidant, for whatever reason they're trying to do that, manipulative or not. But that's what they're ascribing to do. And for the avoidant, it could be many other things, something simple as just stress release. It's more physical, it's more mechanical.
Yep. When I work with a tremendous number of quite wonderful avoidant women, but one thing that I find again and again is when they talk about sex with their partners, I ask them some of the details just to understand what's going on, and they almost universally say, "I prefer to do it facing away, so there's no kissing, no face touching, no eye contact, like face away, get the job done." And
Yeah.
and that's the opposite of most women who are like, "Please rub your face in my eyeballs." And like
Yes.
that's completely the opposite, which shocks most anxiously attached men. She wants nothing to do with me, and from her perspective, she's performing a service for him and also trying to get the physical stimulation for herself.
That's exactly it. Yeah. So, and that is on the list too. So yeah, we're going to park that for a moment, but you're getting to the interesting stuff, right? You're going to see that all of this has to do with managing the level of vulnerability that you are sharing with your partner. Okay. Cause this is what this is about. So moving to our second point, when we look at anxious folks, oftentimes we see that they're overthinking, that they are stuck in their head and on a loop of something like, am I pleasing my partner? Do they like what I'm doing? Does my body look okay? Like this worry loop, but facing outward, they're worried about everything to do with their partner, not so much themselves.
Yep.
Now the
These
avoidant.
are these really quick. These are the women who freeze up usually during the sex act, and they're just like, okay, tell me what to do. You want me to raise this leg? You want me to flap my arms like a chicken? Cool, no problem. Tell me when to stop.
Yeah.
She goes along with his plan to try
Hmm.
to make him happy. He has a plan. He saw it in a video on the internet, and now he's going to recreate it with me, and I'm going to give him the same experience, and he'll be happy. And that's usually, it doesn't actually make him happy. It becomes a solo experience for him at that point,
Yeah,
but
100%.
he's
Or
not really
it's the
happy either.
women that like insist that the lights be off when you have sex, right? Because, oh, he's not going to like my body. It's not, maybe they have a wound of I'm not good enough, I'm unlovable, right? So he can't, if he sees this, he'll get turned off. And listen, my experience is if a man is in bed with you, he's sexually attracted to you. Doesn't mean he wants a relationship with you, but he's happy with whatever you got going on.
I have learned, here's something very strange that I've never told anybody that I've learned about working with anxiously attached women. All of them know which one of their boob is slightly larger than the other one. They all
Yeah,
have like lefty or righty, and they're all like mortified that one is slightly bigger than the other. And they're like, I'm going to get in the bedroom and he's going to laugh at me because one boob is slightly bigger. And like, no man on earth has ever been like, oh my gosh, her boobs are hideous. One is slightly bigger than the other. I could not even look at them. I don't think that's ever happened, but every anxious woman on the planet knows which boob is slightly bigger and is horrified by it. It's a strange thing.
yeah, and I've heard this many times before too. And because, I do have fearful avoidant traits, which means I have some of the traits of the anxious, some of the traits of the avoidant. I too have had that conversation. I remember once speaking to a lover and I was like, you like the bigger one, right? And he's like, what are you talking about? He didn't even notice, but in my mind, there was a clear preference. So we tell ourselves all sorts of stories. But so going back to the anxious people, they often get stuck in their head thinking about all sorts of things. And the avoidant people, they often struggle to stay present during intimacy. So they will sometimes have a tendency to disassociate, like, and emotionally check out. So I don't know if you've ever had this experience before, but you're in the throes of passion and you can just tell that they've left the room, like emotionally, right? They're still there, but they're not there. They're somewhere.
Right. She talks and he goes, whoa, I forgot you were here. Right. Like
I've actually,
the worst story I had was a fearful, avoidant, a disorganized woman that came in and said, Adam, I got to tell you about this guy that I just slept with. And I'm like, okay. And he was so avoidant. Well, how did you know he was avoidant? Because he kept his sunglasses on during sex. Like that's, like, yes, that's the disorganized style. That's the avoidance style right there. It's like, it's two people having solo experiences that they are connected temporarily to facilitate and then separate.
that is wild. I have never heard the sunglass story before, and I've heard plenty of stories. But yeah, it reminds me of like when we're children, parallel play, right? That phenomenon where two people could be in the same room but ignoring each other and just doing their own thing. Yeah. But I really have had this experience before where I, said to a partner, like, where did you go? And they're like, wait, what do you mean? I'm still here. I'm like, are you?
Yeah. Where'd you go? Narnia. Just Narnia, right up here. That's all. No,
Yeah.
it is, and it seems like avoidant people have two modes. One is okay, now I'm in my mode where I'm getting my pleasure, and they're
Mhm.
grinding it out, and they forget you're there. But the other is excessively performative, though, and that's what's
Yes.
fascinating. Is avoidant people are like there's a saying in my private coaching community. There's a saying. Avoidant in the sheets, secure in the streets. That's the goal. You get a partner who's avoidant in the sheets because they are so targeted on making sure you get your experience as long as they actually like you. And then it's how do I trigger enormous release in my partner and then get my experience is what they tend to do. Yeah, you're making a
Yeah.
face, Yep.
I do know. And I'm on the fence with this one because I think this behavior can be manipulative. And I do love how you have distinguished within the categories, subcategories. So I think within the avoidance, you talk about ethical and you talk about toxic.
The manipulative, the
I mean,
ethical and manipulative.
right. Okay. So, it could be manipulative in that they're so hyper attentive and it's the best sex you ever had, but so they hook you, right?
Some of them
But
are. Some of them are. I will say the ethical avoidant people. What I think I'm noticing. You correct. You tell me what you think about this. is avoidant people, especially the ethical ones, they have not really had oxytocin release themselves because they're always in their sympathetic nervous system. They don't
Mhm.
understand the oxytocin bonding that's happening.
Mhm.
They experience dopamine. So when they trigger
Mhm.
and they love bomb somebody else, the ethical ones, they think they're giving you dopamine. And so then they can justify, okay, now it's my turn for dopamine. And to them, it's a fair exchange of dopamine, which is why when you start getting emotionally addicted and like twitching because it's being pulled away from you with the oxytocin withdrawals, they don't understand why. They're like, we've had a free exchange of dopamine back and forth. Why are you acting like I owe you now? What's going on? What is this weird thing?
So
And so I
interesting.
think that's what they're doing in the bedroom. I think they're trying to give you dopamine so that they can then get their dopamine and feel calm and peaceful. And it's a fair exchange, a fair transaction. But yeah, the manipulative ones, I think they understand more of what they're doing, and they're activating it on purpose to try to keep her on the hook. I've had plenty of women come in and say, this guy, like, he only calls me every 2 weeks, but when he does, it's this wild, lavish weekend, and I just can't bring myself to say no to him. And I say, yep, he knows what he's doing. He knows exactly what he's doing.
Yeah, I would agree entirely. And I think it's, you talk about it as being a transaction, and I think that's very accurate, actually. I have known, some people that sort of keep score, right? Like, well, I did
Mm-hmm.
this for you, now you do this for me, and this. Whereas if we go back to what we talked about, sex with a securely attached couple, it's a shared experience. It's not a transactional. I'm going to do this, and then you're going to do that. But yeah, I think sex can absolutely be weaponized. I think that it can be used in a manipulative way. So
History shows that. Yep, plenty of
right,
examples.
no,
Plenty of examples. Anybody, let me know in the comments. Do you think sex can be weaponized or misused? Please let us know in the comments. I'd love to hear your
no.
thoughts on that. But yes, absolutely. Let's roll on. What do your notes say next?
All
Because you
right,
came very
okay.
prepared for this one.
I'm very prepared for sure. So, okay, the third point that I wanted to make: anxious versus avoidance. So, we kind of touched on this already. The anxious will very much focus on their partner's needs, right? So they're always outwardly looking. So they're going to focus there, sometimes without even communicating their own needs, like abandonment of their own needs, right? This is a very common behavior that we see. Not so much with the avoidant. The avoidance is typically more self-focused in their mindset. And they do prioritize their own comforts and their own boundaries. And it's an interesting point to make because I think people are going to hear that and go, that sounds like a selfish person. That's not the point I'm trying to make. I think that avoidant people are very good with boundaries. And they don't waver. They know what they want. They'll communicate it, and they're specific. Whereas someone who's anxious, preoccupied, we know that they really struggle with boundaries. This is not a strength of theirs. And so, I think we can see that there's a big difference in terms of how boundaries come into play with sex.
And I want to hammer this point home for the audience at home. What Bev has said is exactly right. Avoidant people are focused on themselves, their own pleasure, their own connection. Doesn't mean they don't love other human beings or they're
Right.
sociopaths. But most of my friends, most of my male friends are all avoidant guys in recovery. I'm fixing them. No, they're great, but they're fantastic. But they always tell me whenever I get into a frustrated situation or I'm stuck on something, I always think, what am I going to do? And one of them will always pipe up and say, well, Adam, the only person who can be responsible for you is you. And I say, well, thanks. I'll take that in the spirit that I know it's intended. It sounds like a horrifying thing for somebody to say to another person, but to
Right.
them, it's the distillation of truth, and it's an encouragement to rise to the challenge, is what it is for them. They prioritize their own boundaries because they expect other people to do the same, and I think that's where they experience a lot of friction with anxious people and frustration against anxious people, is
Mhm.
because anxious people don't do that, and so it feels so dishonest to them and so confusing that they think of anxious people are the manipulative ones, and they push back on that and say, you're supposed to give me your boundaries, and the fact that you aren't, that is a violation of my trust. Why are you doing this? So both sides are pointing fingers at the other one saying, you're manipulating me. 100%.
Yeah, such a good point. Hey, we're going to talk about libido. You ready to talk about libido?
Ooh, let's do
Ooh,
this.
okay. Anxious people. We often see that there is a heightened or a perceived heightened sense of libido as a way to secure closeness, right?
In
And
that first
reassurance.
year, especially in that first
Yeah.
year.
So it's like, those anxious people want to have sex all the time because they love that physical closeness. They're also not at the point where they've started their healing and understanding that they can ask for intimacy in other ways that don't involve sex. So, they want sex all the time.
Yep.
Super
These
interesting.
are these are the anxious ladies who they come in and start out 3 times a day, and
Yep.
then at about 1 year it falls off a cliff and it's once a month. And it just completely dies because they're not getting the oxytocin bonding they needed. The performative desire starts to diminish, and then they start to feel rejected, which of course is going to tank the female libido anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that if you nurture her properly and care for her and help her in that way, the female libido goes kind of like stays pretty solid. Like twice a day is not outside the realm of normal possibility in a securely attached relationship with a healthy woman.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the flip side, if we look at the avoidance, our research will say that they tend to be less open, obviously, to intimacy. So they can experience a lower libido, right? Especially if they feel overwhelmed by the closeness of the relationship.
I've had plenty of male clients come in who are avoidant, and they say, "Adam, I'm going to show you a picture of my girlfriend." And they like share screen a picture, and she's like, "Oh, she's very pretty." Like supermodel almost. Some of them they're actually dating supermodels. Some of my clients, and they're like, "When I look at this woman, we're at 7 months. When I look at this woman, I see the most hideous human being on the planet, and my libido goes to absolute zero." I'm like, really? Yes, because she keeps talking to me about commitment and moving in together, and I think I would rather die. And his libido dies, especially at 7 months from the novelty dopamine dead,
Yeah.
right? And he doesn't have the oxytocin. I have so many female clients that come in. We're at 2 years, and he hasn't had an erection in 6 months, and he
Mm-hmm.
says it's my fault, and we don't know what's going on. And well, his oxytocin is dead, and that's the biggest driver of erection after that 6 months of novelty dopamine. His novelty dopamine is burned out with you. And he's also burned that off over the last 20, 30 years of viewing pornography. So that's also killed his sex drive and his ability to actually bond with you. We haven't even talked about sex drive with pornography here.
No, we're
Um,
getting there.
Avoidant men, and so their build is having high libido, but only in dopamine binging fashion, where they then have to go find a stranger somewhere in an alley to try to get it up after 6 months.
That's what it is.
Yeah, there we
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. So the next point builds on what we were just talking about. So the anxious people may use sex to repair or soothe any relational tensions, right? So this is not a surprise. It's part of the same, you know, grouping of behaviors that we're talking about. But just as you pointed out, avoidance may withdraw from sex entirely. Forget just low libido. They may withdraw entirely if they see it as a source of pressure from, relational distress. So yeah, they just might cut it off.
Which is funny because they get the bad rap as being the sexual manipulators, but ultimately they're the ones who cut the line and pull back when the relationship doesn't feel right.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, that is true. So we're going to switch gears here a little bit and we're going to talk about compliance. So folks who are more on the anxious side, they are typically the ones that are the most sexually compliant. Now, this is not going to surprise you. So they're likely to engage in unwanted and often risky sexual behaviors like unprotected sex. So it's like, oh, you don't have a condom? Oh, okay, oh, it's fine. That type of stuff. So obviously being driven by a rejection, a fear of rejection, right? If I don't do what they want in this moment, if I stand up for myself, if I express my needs, if I have a boundary, I might be rejected, and that's more harmful. I might as well just go with the flow.
And this I think is what creates, I'd love to get your take on this. This is what I think creates so much anger and resentment and discord during breakups
Mhm.
and accusations of sexual impropriety, even illegal behaviors, is because there's often a pressure, a perceived pressure to perform, right? I have to say yes to everything. He wants another girl involved at 7 months. I don't really want that, but okay, I'll lose him if I don't. So yes. And there's an enthusiastic yes, or even a hesitant yes, but there's a yes. And he's like, okay, she's on board. And then they break up at a year or two, and she says, you made me X and Y and Z and this, and I felt used and hated, and you should have known and you should have cared. And he says, you said yes in all these instances. And now it's this huge he said, she said battle back and forth where she genuinely feels completely wronged. And he usually, many of them genuinely feel like, no, this was completely consensual. What do you mean? I think
Yeah.
that's driving a massive distrust between different partners in our culture. What are your
I
thoughts
agree.
there?
Well, I see both their sides. They're both right, and they're also both wrong, because the reality here is that when you become secure and you understand your own needs and you understand your own boundaries and you learn how to communicate them, you realize it is your responsibility to communicate your boundaries. So if you go along with someone and you say, okay, that is consent. You can't turn back and say, but I really didn't want to do it. Well, it was your responsibility. Like I can't read your mind, right? So I'm going to go by what you say, or what you do.
Yep. At some point, in a mature consenting adult needs to take responsibility for
Yeah.
themselves. There also does need to be check-ins. There also
Mm-hmm.
does need to be verification, right? You talk with the person, you have a conversation, and you actually sit and talk it through and say, okay, this is what I'm looking for. Are you also into this? Is this cool with you? You know, this is a step for us. Have a conversation like adults, right? Do your due diligence, avoiding people especially. Do your due diligence. Have a
Mm-hmm.
sit down conversation before you introduce things, have those talks, you know, double check, just make sure someone's comfortable. I highly recommend that, especially if you're in a committed relationship and you care about the other person. Double check, make sure they're good to go with things like that. Ask questions. And then on the other side, it is your responsibility to be a grown adult and to communicate like an adult. Otherwise, you will experience things you don't want to experience because you're saying absolutely yes and opening the doors.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I'll share with you, I had a friend who was really on the anxious side, anxious, preoccupied, but really so. And she started dating a new man, and this man had a vasectomy. And so he asked her to remove her IUD. She had an IUD that, to prevent pregnancy, but also because she was having other hormonal problems, and she needed, it was helping her in other ways. But he asked her to remove her IUD, and the next day she went to the office and she had it taken out. Now, when I said to her, but why did you do that? You know that this was helping you in so many different ways. She said, I couldn't say no to him. I said, what do you mean you couldn't say no? She said, if I kept in the IUD, he would have thought that that meant that I was cheating on him with other men. And I thought to myself, wow, this is such an example of someone who just doesn't understand boundaries, who doesn't understand communication, because she could have just said to her partner at the time, you know, I understand you think that, I might cheat on you. That's not my intention, but I am going to keep my IUD because I need it for other reasons. But she didn't.
Same thing. I'll never forget the supermodel who came to me after she had six threesomes with her husband,
Mm.
and they came into couples coaching because she said, I finally realized that I don't like doing this at all, and that I've just been telling him yes, and I don't know how to tell him no. And now we've done it 6 times, and I hate it. And all I can see is like the back of her head whenever I'm trying to kiss him. And she had never said no, and he never knew that she didn't like it, and it was the only way he could perform because his dopamine had been gone for so long and the emotional intimacy was dead. So they had to recover from that in their
Yeah.
marriage. It was horrible.
Wow. Yeah. So the takeaway here too, like anxious people really, really struggle with boundaries, right? And communicating what it is that they need. And when we talk about the world of sex, again, they become the folks who are highly sexually compliant. Right. So it's like, you want me to swing from the chandelier? Hold on. I'll just go grab the ladder. Right. There's no is not in the equation. So definitely something to think about. Now on the flip side, when we think about the avoidant may rely very heavily on solo sex, on masturbation. and pornography, again, in an effort to avoid intimacy and to remain self-reliant. How important is it for our avoidance to be self-reliant, right? That's one of the keys. So when it comes to sex, it makes sense that they would almost prefer this. Even if they're in a relationship, some avoidants prefer solo sex.
Hmm.
It's just
Or
easier.
or going and finding a stranger and not telling their partner about it, just because it takes the edge off and it means nothing, and I'll just get through it really quick, and it's just dopamine. It's like going buying an ice cream cone on a difficult day. It's the same thing.
Yeah. So
What does
we're
all of
getting
this mean?
Yeah, we're getting
I was
towards
gonna
the end.
ask.
I think we're going to see some things popping up here again. So we talked earlier about the anxious folks sometimes sexualizing their desire for affection. So that is a behavior that we see very often. So they can use sex again for approval and validation. What they're trying to do is get their attachment needs met. They don't know how to do it, so they're using sex because they know that works. Right. So they're going to their tried and true method. There's a pattern, and they're just repeating that pattern. But if we look at the avoidance, they are the attachment style, that has the most open attitude towards casual sex. Yeah. Greater number of sexual partners, and this idea of no strings attached. So casual sex is something that is very, I would say, widely accepted, sought after, even by folks who are avoidant. Now, I know, do we, I mean, I know you know why this is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
100%. But let's hear you say it.
Okay. So the idea here again is focus on the physical, minimize any chance of pair bonding, minimize, the level of intimacy and vulnerability that is required. So it's like, if my physical need is to release stress and have just a little hit of love and connection, because these folks still need a little hit, then the fastest thing for me to do is to have a one night stand, and it's done. Right? I don't want to have pillow talk with you. I don't want to make you breakfast in the morning. I have work to get to. It's like, you know what? I'm going to go to the gym for 7 o'clock. I'll see you at 8. By 9 o'clock, I'm in bed. It's like, it's an
If they
activity.
had 100%, if they had an ejector seat button for the guest side of their bed, they would install it and push it the moment sex was done, like flop you out the window kind of thing. Um, and call you an Uber on the way down as well is what it would do.
Yeah,
It is. I think the problem here is that most avoidant people, because they don't get oxytocin, they don't know the fullness of good,
they don't.
really good, fulfilling hormonal
Yeah,
bonded sex with oxytocin, serotonin, everything releasing through their system. They don't experience that. It is a dopamine fest to them. So yes, it can be fun. You can have a lot of fun doing
yeah,
dopamine, but it burns out so fast. This is why a lot of guys in their 50s come in and say, Adam, sex is just not, like nothing anymore. Is this really all there is? I've had, I can't do it with one person. It has to be two people, and it can't be in a bedroom. It has to be on an airplane, and it has to be, we're all, whatever. It has to escalate and escalate and escalate just to even get the same hit anymore.
hmm,
Versus really good, loving, committed, oxytocin rich sex with a loving,
yeah.
committed partner is so
Connective
deeply
sex.
fulfilling and doesn't burn out. Connective sex,
Yeah.
unitive sex. There's that word again.
Unity of sex.
But having that where it enhances the relationship, and you grow, and then the next time you have sex is even better because of this time.
Yeah.
That's what it's supposed to be.
I'll share. I'll share on a personal front, because I've shared that I was quite avoidant. There was a large period of time in my life where the idea of cuddling just gave me the biggest ick there was. I didn't like it. I didn't want to be touched that way. I was not one of those women that was like, I need aftercare. In fact, I was like, all right, we're done. See you. Bye. I was the one
If
who
you
would say, bye. I didn't want that. Again, I was in my avoidance side. I didn't want that level of intimacy. when I started going through my healing process and I started to allow myself to feel different, sensual sensations and allow myself to be cuddled, I mean, now I can't be without it. Now I was like, oh my gosh, I've never felt this level of safety before. I didn't, and so yeah, it was wild actually, and I absolutely love it now.
If we put the absolute perfect, most amazing sex on a spectrum, 1% to 100%, and put like, as you and I know, secure, loving, intimate, bonded, fulfilling, hormonal sex. If we put that as absolute the pinnacle of 100% up here, where would you say most avoidant people are experiencing sex on that spectrum of 1 to 100? What percent are they experiencing the joy, the fulfillment, the pleasure, even?
So, I think on the physical scale of pleasure, it's probably pretty high, like 80, 90, right? Because they're getting what they need out of sex. On the emotional scale of pleasure, it's pretty low. It's not a priority, and I don't think they allow it to be part of the equation. So, yeah, would you say about the same thing?
Yeah, I would say if we combine those two, I'd say they probably only experience about 40% of the overall joy.
Yeah.
80% physical, like 10% emotional, collapse it down to about 40, 50%. And most of them they feel lonely. They're
Yep.
longing for peace. They're longing for intimate connection that's peaceful and safe, which they don't believe is possible. So then they just say, okay, I guess it's not. And then once they, like yourself, once they really fulfill that connection, have that richness of both sides of the experience, you can't even go back. It's like a McDonald's hamburger versus like a tomahawk steak. Like, would you rather eat this McDonald's hamburger? Yes, please give me those.
Yeah, it's so, so true. And I know we'll speak about healing a little bit in a moment and where that takes you. Um, but I want to talk about next a little bit about how anxious people sometimes confuse or are very prone to confusing sex with love. In their minds, they get meshed together as the same thing. And unfortunately, for the avoidant, they couldn't be more different, right? For the avoidant, they can easily separate sex from the rest of the relationship and from the concept of love. They are very, very good at this concept of compartmentalization. So that's a huge distinguisher. So, someone who's anxious and who's just experienced this really passionate moment of sex might in their mind go, wow, this person really loves me. And the other person is going, I have some good sex. I need a nap, right? I need a sandwich.
Yep. I call this the cheeseburger effect. He is now her best friend on the planet. She loves and adores him. She assumes he feels the same, and he's like, "Wow, that was a really juicy hamburger. I'll come here again when I'm hungry." And
Right.
and that's what that is.
Yeah, that's it's pretty illustrative, but that is true. Wow. So we talked about boundaries. This was next on my list, but I think we already talked about it, right? So the anxious having very poor boundaries and the avoidant having really strong boundaries. That's another different. Now, the
I
last,
I would I would love for us to give some care and some attention to the fearful, avoidant, the disorganized people here, because
I'm going to
they've
get
been they've
into
been
that
wait. There we go. See, you're on the list.
I
I knew
am.
it's
You're
there.
so
I know
on
it's
the
there.
list. I wouldn't ignore you. I'm an FA. I was an FA, so I wouldn't ignore you. The last point that I wanted to make just between the anxious and the avoidant was um, oftentimes when the anxious is worried about components of the relationship, it impedes their ability to fully surrender to erotic sensations. So there's actual studies that say that anxious people will experience fewer orgasms, right? And if we just sit on that for a moment, that's sad. They're trying so hard to please their partner. They're so in their head. They're so worried about things. They can't just surrender to the moment, right? And allow yourself to just feel that pleasure.
Yep.
Um,
A lot of anxiously attached women, when I talk with them, I talk about their sex life and everything during the assessment and the coaching. And I say, when was the last time do you have orgasms with your partners? And they're like, I remember last back in 1972. It's like that's how far back they have to go, right? Like
of course,
it's
they remember the date. It was the last
yeah,
time.
it's been 50 years, and but that's their experience. It's like, well, and they'll say, well, it's not a big deal. I don't really care. I'm there to make sure he's happy. I'm there to make sure he's having a good time.
Mm,
I don't really
right.
care if I do or not. And it blocks the oxytocin so that they can't even have a uterine contraction because they don't even have enough oxytocin in their system because they're so amped up and freaked out that during the experience they
Right.
just can't.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so unfortunate. So last point, and then we're going to the FAs. The last point on the avoidance. Um, you touched on this, and I said we were going to get to this. So they are less likely, studies show, less likely to engage in missionary style sex, opting for, the study said, alternative sex acts that may reduce the likelihood of pair bonding. So, and you talked about this. This is there are missionary being, of course, one of the most popular ways to have face-to-face sex, right? Very, very intimate. You're looking into someone's eyes. You're reading their emotions. It's as vulnerable as it gets, right? And there are many different beautiful positions where two lovers can be face to face. There are also many positions that you are not face to face. You are very specifically, looking at other parts. And I think that for those that are avoidant, that is a much more comfortable scenario.
Yep.
So,
If you could be in if you could be in two different rooms, that would be ideal for them. Really. Like it's don't kiss, don't touch my face, and let me focus on what I'm doing so that I
yeah.
can try to drive toward the experience. And it's
Mm-hmm.
that's generally what they're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
It is not the physical pleasurable sensation they even think it is. Avoidant women in particular usually have to work much harder than their
Yeah.
counterparts if they are going to have an orgasm. They usually will, but it's because they've worked twice as hard and they got the belt sander out kind of thing, and they're focused looking the other way, focused on what they're trying to do, and
Yeah.
that's what it is. It's like she's trying to adjust a radiator in her car. Don't talk to me. I'm trying to do this it's very important calculation right now, and that's why she doesn't want you in her face kissing her. That's one reason.
Yeah, it's interesting. You brought up, toys also. Avoidants don't mind toys. So,
Mm,
well, because
they
it's
need
like,
them. They need them.
it's back to self-reliance. I'm going to take care of myself. You need that. Great. Bring it on in. Do your thing. They're okay with it, which is interesting. So I
There's
wanted to,
a there's a very, very large population of women who cannot achieve climax without direct, exact stimulation.
like
Uh,
90%. It's
a huge
high.
amount. It's high.
Yeah.
And what I have found I'm going to phrase this carefully because it's going to sound weird. When I work with my coaching couples and I give them verbal instructions in session and send them to do their homework, as they build their emotional connection, a lot of the women begin experiencing more orgasms that are not just direct stimulation. It's less direct stimulation. The oxytocin is flowing so high that it goes like that, and her own emotions actually send her over the edge
Mhm.
even more than the physical sensation does. So, securely attached intimacy is the most likely to produce spontaneous orgasms for women.
I love that. Yet another reason to become securely attached.
Ladies,
I'm
if you
gonna put
want
that
more
on my
of them and
website.
easier and faster, like, yeah, there you go.
I'm gonna put it on my website. Better orgasms.
Better orgasms with less work.
I love it. All right. So our fearful avoidance, our FAs. So we do know that the fearful avoidance obviously embody traits of anxious and also avoidance. So everything that we talked about in the full spectrum, you might see in yourself bits and pieces, and that would be normal. Again, depending on how far away you are from secure, and some of the experiences that you've had. Now, we do know that a lot of folks who have fearful avoidant attachment style come out of homes where there was abuse. So this is a bit of a tricky one. because not all abuse is the same abuse, obviously. So for those that have experienced that looks very different, and I'm actually not going to talk about this at this point in time. But those who have experienced other types of abuse, like emotional, psychological, physical abuse, what we tend to see is two camps. So almost like two polarities. So we see that fearful avoidance either really strongly reject sex, like sex is not a part of their world at all, or they become hypersexual. And we see this polarity. It's quite interesting, actually. One of the things that we know about fearful avoidance is we know that they really like a high degree of uncertainty, variety, adventure, novelty. It's almost like it's replaying the chaos that they experienced in childhood. So these folks will be very playful. They are likely to dabble in lots of different things to sort of meet that I want variety, right? I want those experiences. And then the other side too is we know another trait that's really important for fearful avoidance is they enjoy relationships with a lot of depth, right? And so
And
we
drama.
do. Pardon me?
Depth and drama at the same time.
And drama. Yeah. But we do see a cohort of people who fall more on sort of the demisexual side, which means that they need to establish some level of emotional connection with you and a level of trust before they will become sexually aroused and engage with you. And this has to do with their ability to trust others. They need to feel safe in your presence. They need to feel like you're being transparent with them. So that depth matters. So that's sort of generally where we fall. What do you think? What do you think, Adam?
The disorganized camp, yes. I know that the research, and this is something fun. The research shows that the more mentally unstable a person is, the higher their partners are to regard the sex as being amazing, because it kind of has to be as a compensation. So it is very much, hey, I don't feel very safe or secure in this relationship. I will fix that very quickly with a couple of practiced moves. And it's this will make me feel safe. This will make me feel loved. This is for many young women in particular who experienced difficult childhoods where they experienced intimacy that they should not have experienced. For many of them, it's almost like this is my purpose. This is all I have to offer.
That's
This
right.
is all I can give you. This is all you want from me. This is all anybody has ever wanted from me.
That's the
I will be the best at
hypersexuality.
it. That
Mm-hmm.
is, I will be the best at it and give it to you, and then you will love me and care for me because it's all I know how to get.
Right.
So a lot of women fall into that camp, unfortunately, in this area with dismissives, with disorganized or fearful avoidance. And it's sad because it's not what they really want. It's a defense mechanism. To be amazing in bed is their defense mechanism
Mm-hmm.
in a variety of ways, and they are likely to get a lot of stimulation. So they're the ones that do say, "I did climax. I did it 15 times last time." But did you actually feel close and bonded and intimate with your partner? Well, no.
Mm.
I think every moment of every day about how they're probably going to leave me, and that turns me on. So I go have lots of sex with them. Well,
Yeah.
wait a minute. Maybe it's not actually quite the response you think it is. Maybe there's a little more fear and terror mixed in here, and maybe this isn't who you are. Maybe this is who you're trying to be, just out of a sense of becoming safe. The goal is not to crank you back down to zero. The goal is to get you to a place where you actually feel loved and safe and fulfilled in your intimate relationships.
Absolutely. And we do know also that fearful avoidants are also not very good with boundaries. So they tend to evoke boundaries when they're angry and like big ones, right? So when
Fear,
they're
fear of
angry,
abandonment. Yep.
so it's like they'll let things slide, and then another thing happens. It's small, but it's been a series of 12 small things that they've let slide. And then they'll, that's it, I'm done. And they'll walk out, like out of anger. They'll put up a strong boundary. So we see that playing out oftentimes with sex too. They're permissive, right? Like we talked about the anxious people being very compliant. So we do see this with the fearful avoidance as well.
Correct. Yep. She will have sex with you for 3 hours and say she loves you the whole time, but because you didn't spoon her afterwards, she gets a crossbow and shoots you. That's kind of the experience.
And
When
then
when they
and then they'll say, "But you should have known. That's what I wanted."
You should have known, and then she'll administer first aid and say, "Now I've saved your life." Right, and it goes back and forth. No, and we joke, but it's a hard, difficult thing to be a disorganized style because the trauma is
Yeah.
so much higher. My encouragement is to every disorganized person out there: you are very unique, and there's not one way we can categorize you completely.
No.
Take pieces from this podcast, write down the pieces that have resonated with you, and then understand that those are pieces that we can change, we can heal, we can grow. You can learn new pieces of yourself and grow toward more of that secure style that Bev shared with you at the beginning about what you're going to be experiencing and looking forward to in the future.
I love that. And I just want to end by saying that healing really does matter. I mean, healing matters in so many different areas of our life, but our attitudes towards sex and what we desire and what we're comfortable with and, the reasons that we'll engage in sex, they do change as you move out of these insecure attachment styles and move towards secure. I've seen it in my own practice. I've seen it in my own self, things that I used to do that were fun and a great distraction. And, I was running away from emotions I didn't want to deal with. Now, the idea of engaging in those types of activities is repulsive to me. And so, I want you to know that it's not a life sentence, right? Your attitudes towards sex and how you want that to be a part of your life or not will change as you heal.
Hmm. I love it. Let's leave the audience with one last thing. Men, you are not having the joyful, wonderful sex you could possibly be having. So if you're avoiding out there, fix that, and you can have so much better sex. If you're an anxious guy, you're really not having the kind of sex you want. In fact, you probably aren't having much sex at all because most women are not looking at you with the masculinity that you want. So they might not be aroused by you. Just be aware of that. Ladies out there, if you're avoidant, it can get a lot better than it is. You're leaving a lot of fun on the table for yourself. And if you're anxious and you want to have a lot more fun in the bedroom, spend a little less time worrying whether right or left is bigger or smaller, and spend more time actually connecting with your partner and understanding what you want in the experience so that you can share that.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts to leave them with, Bev?
I think that was perfectly
Sums it
said.
up.
Yeah,
Sums it
really.
up.
Yeah, you just have me
Wonderful.
laughing about the left or the right.
It is what it is, and every lady out there knows. Ladies, you know exactly what I'm talking about. All right, Bev, where can people find you for when they want to learn more about secure attachment, secure love, and all of those wonderful things? Where should they look?
Thank you for the opportunity. My website is securelyloved.com. We're also on Instagram, at securely_loved. And my adult children have taught me TikTok. So I know I'm a modern woman now. I'm on TikTok as well. Securely_loved. We are a group of practitioners, so it's not just me. And yeah, we'd love to work with you or hear from you. And thank you again, Adam, for the great conversation.
Fantastic. Glad to have you here. I am Adam Lane Smith. You can find all of my works and everything that you need to become securely attached on adamlanesmith.com. You can also find my free newsletter there under the newsletter tab. It's also going to be linked down below in the description of this show. So you can sign up, get free tips on relationships, secure attachment, maybe a little bit about good sex in a loving relationship. We'll add some of that in there too. Thank you for being here today. Leave a comment, comment, subscribe, turn on notifications, and be you. Keep building great relationships, and we'll see you in the next one.